Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Sullivan, and I'm the chair of the Board of Accountancy. I'm calling this public meeting of the State of Oregon Board of Accountancy to order. Today is Thursday, February 15th, 2024, and it is 8:35 a.m. This meeting is being held in person at the board offices on 200 Hawthorne Avenue Southeast, Suite D 450, Salem, Oregon 97301. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom participation is also enabled. If you are participating in this meeting by Zoom, please be sure to mute your microphone and unmute only when you are called upon to speak. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, the meeting will be paused until they are resolved. I'll now take roll call of members and guests. I'll start around the table and then move around the room before we go to Zoom. So again, Joe Sullivan, board chair.
Angie Hunt, board legal counsel.
Stuart Morris, board member.
Jeremiah Leopard, board staff.
Jason Robinson, board treasurer.
Haley Lyons, board member.
Raul Valdivia, vice chair.
Martin Piccioni, executive director.
Matthew Stein, board staff.
Okay.
Sherry McPherson, OSCPA guest.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll just call on those on Zoom as I see them. Logan.
Logan Steele, board member, present via Zoom.
Amanda.
Amanda Fells, OAIE, present via Zoom.
Okay, and then we have Janelle. I think if you hear us, could you take yourself off mute and just announce your full name and that you're present via Zoom? Okay, well, I'll keep on moving. I believe, yeah, if we know who that is. Andrew.
Andrew Barlow, board staff in board office, attending by Zoom.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. All right. I don't think, is there anyone I didn't recognize? I think that covers everybody. All right, so we can move on to item number 2, which is the agenda review and approval. I think any comments on the agenda today, Martin? I think you
I do have one request. It turns out that because we've been very busy on firm renewals, we actually have not processed new firm registrations. So therefore, we don't have any items this time for you under item 20B, the ratification. So we only have 2 types of ratification lists for you this time as opposed to 3. We are making up for it in volume on the other ones, but and the firm renewals, but we could take 20B off the agenda because there's literally nothing there, and I just wanted to make that clear for the record.
Okay.
Or did you echo or Bravo? C or B?
B. All right, any other questions, comments on the agenda? We need a motion to approve that. So could I have a motion to approve the agenda with that one amendment, removing item 20B?
I make a motion to remove 20B from the agenda.
I'll second the motion.
We have a second. Any other comments? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Okay, motion passes. All right. Move on to item 3. So the review of public board summary. So we have in our materials.
And you have all of them. So most of them came out supplementally. The big one from the December one was in your original packet. I want to just publicly say, I want to thank Matthew and Jeremiah for finally getting me caught up with those pieces. So I wanted to really not have that hanging over me any longer.
All right. Perfect. Any questions, comments on the supplemental materials or the meeting summaries? Hearing none. Okay. We are going to make good progress. All right. We'll move on to item number 4, public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Please raise your hand in the room or use the Zoom raise hand feature. If I call on you for comment, you will be permitted to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes, and staff will unmute you so you can speak. As chair, I do reserve the right to end your comment early and have staff mute you if your comments do not pertain to the authority given to this board by the legislature to regulate the CPA profession and public accountancy firms in the state. And I find it funny every time I have to actually say that now. But any public comment? Not seeing any in the room, any via Zoom. Again, use the raise hand feature so we can call on you. Not seeing any. So we'll keep moving and we'll move on to item number 5, report of the OSCPA. So Sherry, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, and passing on regrets for today from Gary Holcomb. So he had a work obligation that couldn't be here. But just looking ahead, we are working towards a new fiscal year, starting April 1st. So you will have a new board liaison from OSCPA. That will be Adam Alpanel, who will assume the role of vice chair, but I'd be happy to spell that for you. So most of you probably know Adam already, like from other activities. So that's coming up. We're also getting ready to announce the new curriculum for professional development coming up. There are a number of on-site programs where they're hybrid, but also I'll just describe it as thousands of virtual programming. So it's very robust. People should be able to find what they want from us, as well as other vendors. Looking through with everything else, we're wrapping up a number of other projects. And I would like to thank the board for the appointment to Laws and Rules. It's been a very productive year, and I'd like to thank you for all the efforts that board members and staff in particular as well, and Angie have put forth with that. I've been receiving very positive comments from the members that I talk with, and the efforts put out from communications by Martin and his team have been very effective with, in my opinion, very effective with licensees. So people seem to have a very, very good view about changes, and I get some positive comments, which is very nice. So thank you. A lot of effort's gone into moving the boat that direction, helping through the pipeline, etc. So that's probably the most important thing we have to talk about today.
Perfect.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
And it's
Sherry.
legislative session, I might add that too.
Yes. Any questions from the board? Not hearing any, so we'll move on to item number 6, report of the OAIA. Amanda, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. So at the OAIA, our volunteer board, we are all.
Hey, Amanda, we're not hearing you. Can you hear us okay? You kind of just trailed off, so.
Like her mic cut out or something.
Yeah.
How's that? Is that better?
You're completely gone right now in terms of,
Can you hear me now?
nope,
Barely.
you may have to reset.
It was like your mic was there and then it just kind of cut off.
It looks like your mic is going in and out.
Can you hear me?
She's like, I don't know what to do about that. I would be the same way.
We'll just offer her to rejoin and do hers.
Yeah, Amanda, if you need to, sign off and rejoin, we'll come right back to you, so you're not. Yeah, thank you. Should we, assuming it's only gonna be 30 seconds, maybe we'll let her try and before we move into that work sessions.
Yeah. See if there's anything else we can sneak in here while we're waiting for her.
She is.
Hear me now?
Yeah, we're not hearing anything, Amanda. Can you hear us okay?
How about Logan? Can you say something? Make sure it's not our speakers.
Good question. How's that sound?
Sounds fine.
Good.
I just noticed his name tag.
Amanda, any chance you could call in? I think there's usually a dial-in number on Zoom and you could just do it by phone potentially. Okay, perfect. Well, let's give you a second to do that.
So Matthew, are you the one controlling the rooms? Okay, so we should have a phone person show up here in a moment.
Still run into issues jumping between these different platforms all the time.
People stay when they don't introduce themselves. Gotcha.
Say that again?
Oh, she was asking if we can tell them to stay, if they don't introduce themselves.
Oh,
Might also do her well to just check her sound settings. If you switch it on speaker or something. Yeah.
Is that? No,
Pause recording.
that must be another phone.
Yeah, no, that was me. That was me.
That's why you hire young people.
yeah, well, let's go ahead and pause the recording here. Resume the recording. Okay, we're back after a brief pause for some technical difficulties. Amanda, can you hear us okay?
I think she's still muted on the phone.
But you're still muted on the phone.
Yeah, Matthew, can you?
Matthew should be able
I can
to.
ask to unmute, but I can't make
On a phone person?
There we go.
All right, are we there?
Yes.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh,
Perfect.
so sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, so we're back with item 6, report of the OAIA. So take it away, Amanda.
Yes, thank you. Well, all of this just to kind of say that, you know, for us, for our volunteer board, we are largely in tax season. So this is kind of where a lot of our focus is. We do have our practitioner roundtable coming up here on March 20th, which is a great opportunity for us to kind of come up for air mid-season, to come together and kind of bounce ideas off of each other for different things that are going on during tax season and maybe some potential, you know, tax issues that we've seen, just to kind of support each other. Aside from that, that is where our focus is. So.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. Any questions from the board?
No questions for the board at this time.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Amanda, and I appreciate figuring that technical issue out for us. So.
All right. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right. We will jump right in now to item number 7, which is our board work session. I know this is the part where we that 1 o'clock, you know, becomes a challenge, but I think we can get through it fairly quick. So you want to lead us off here, starting with 7A, the NASBA licensure task force?
Yeah, and that's probably one of the more important pieces that we have to get through today. In your materials, ultimately, there is a ask that you have formally under item 7A4, which is the comment request out to all jurisdictions from NASBA. But I think it's really important to kind of move through, excuse me a little bit, to move through the history here a little bit that you have in item 7A1 through 3 to help you kind of prepare for ultimately how you want to shape the comment back to NASBA here. And I think what I want to do first is just take you through a little bit what all has happened. It's been a very busy time since the board made that decision at the last board meeting. This is really the jumping off point, right? The last board meeting, the board made a decision as part of its strategic planning discussion to also direct me to seek a legislative concept in a 2025 session, at least start that process for adding an additional pathway of 120+2, right? What you see in your materials that effectively we then turned around immediately because the board meeting was on Friday, the 15th of December. The NASBA task force met on the 18th of December. So very early in the morning on the 18th of December, I sent out an email making sure that NASBA was aware what we were doing and why, emphasizing that this did not mean that the board was disengaging from the task force, that in fact, we wanted to know what the task force is doing and will be paying close attention, right? But we needed to, as a courtesy, at least let them know that the board was starting to move in that direction and had given that direction as part of its strategic planning. After that came effectively the webinar that you have in your materials, right? Where in essence, and I'll try to summarize it as neutrally as possible. You see that there was a really significant shift in some ways, right? And the easiest way that I would summarize it, and I think I did it once in one of the emails out to the board members, but it's important enough to summarize it here publicly, is it's a very significant shift in the task force because after a long period of time where both AICPA and NASBA said 150 plus 1 for licensure is the only game in town, and anything else undermines substantial equivalency and mobility, there's a pretty dramatic shift and basically said, okay, we're now working on an additional alternative to 150 plus 1, right? So that was the first big shift. And the second big shift is that they acknowledged that there are ways that they will be willing to work with jurisdictions on to minimize impacts to substantial equivalency and mobility, right? So that was the first signal. Then came the details in the webinar where we had for the first time a little bit of an opportunity. And I don't know whether any board members actually had an opportunity to be in those webinars, but that's the reason I at least threw the slides in here so you have a sense of what they're doing, right? In essence, what they're trying to create is an additional pathway that is far more structured. So remember, right now, all we have is 30 empty credits in the when we went from 120 to 150, right? Plus 1 year of supervised experience. It's pretty simple and straightforward, right? What they're currently discussing is a highly structured, firm-based approach of experiential learning directly integrated into a person's experience at a firm, where firms essentially would have to get qualified, certified to be able to be part of a process that, at least in the current stages, looks a lot like a roughly 3-year pathway of, okay, 120 hours of education is enough under that pathway, but you're looking at about roughly 3 years of pretty heavily structured learning, right? So I sat down with Joe after the webinar and said, we now have a comment request from NASBA. We're going to have to bring it to this board meeting. What are you comfortable in terms of an initial response back, right? And you have that in the packet in there. And essentially, the response was, number one, acknowledging and praising that they've really significantly shifted their position and their level of flexibility, right? At the same time, Joe also kindly authorized me to at least raise a slight hint saying that pending discussion here, right, it does seem like this is a pretty complex pathway that you're developing.
I'm trying not
for
to
those 3
interrupt.
years, right?
It's overly complicated. It's taking too long.
So
why do you need all that structure when they're employed under the supervision of CPAs to begin with? I want your opinion too, but I got lots of comments.
yeah, so
But
what's not so obvious in the packet, maybe, and that I'll just want to emphasize is the part that I understand the least in the current environment is unsaid, but clearly in the water is, and I'm searching for as neutral of a term as I can, but lack of acceptance, if not potentially hostility, toward supervised experience, right? There seems to be this real resistance to an elongated version of supervised experience. I don't know why. I don't understand that part. I will be honest. I do not understand intellectually why there is such a resistance to that piece. But it's clear that there is resistance. The flexibility at the task force level at this point, the only honest thing that I can tell the board is that the flexibility at the task force level right now does not extend to embracing a 120 hours plus 2 years of supervised experience model. For whatever sets of reasons, I don't know exactly yet what those are. They really don't like that. They really just want to have that very structured program. So that's kind of where we are, and I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you. Perfect. Keeping us on track. I'll stop for a sec. You guys probably got a hint of how I feel about it. Like I do like that they're a little bit open. There is a task force, but I mean, my first comment is like, you need to go faster, right? Because we're going to move on a parallel path and hoping we land in the same spot. But I mean, that's kind of the direction we've set. But I'll stop for a second. Any other thoughts, questions?
No one expressed, you said you don't know why there's resistance. No one expressed a reason?
No, not on that end. They are just really, really formally advocating for that their interest and their focus is on, I think it's deeply rooted in history, because I'm aware that historically there are deep regrets by members of the former leadership, maybe current leadership as well, that when the profession shifted from a 120 semester hour standard to 150 semester hour standard, that they failed to provide structure to the 30 semester hours that were added on as the education requirement. And so instinctively, I feel like they're trying to make up for the ground that they've lost, and said, okay, this time around, we're going to get it right. And we're going to, essentially make sure that it's a really meaningful and strong pathway that we're allowing. So I think the heart is in the right place. They're trying to, produce good CPAs. The worry is, how scalable is it? When you're looking at this from, looking at least Amanda's picture on the screen here very deliberately, with what I'm saying next, given, the population she primarily represents, right? There is significant worries that what they're coming up with may be next to impossible for very small firms, solo practitioners, and others to access, because they don't have the infrastructure to actually qualify under that program, right? And that's a significant concern, right? So
I think they've missed the mark on this big time. Like, I don't think they're listening to what the profession wants and what profession values. Creating this new structure is one. So they're saying 3 years. So they're really trying to say 3 years of experience is somehow not equivalent to that extra 30 credits plus 1 year of experience, which I find baffling. Because that's not what practicing CPAs are saying. Like, that's not what we value. I would take the 3 year experienced person any day versus a 1 year experienced person. They're so much more qualified. So I think that needs to be in the comments. So again, go faster is the first one, just because like there's pipeline issue and this needs to move faster, because then state boards need to adapt. That all takes years, and that drives me crazy. So move faster, and then you totally missed the mark on the structure.
Right, nobody was asking for you to define the 30 credits.
Yeah.
Like, that was not the, that's not the ask.
Nobody's asking you to do that.
Nope.
Um,
So replacing it with this like structured professional program is like,
Not necessarily replacing it. They're saying,
Well-
in the alternative, you have.
Right.
we'll create an alternative pathway that sounds like a massive pain.
yeah,
So not only candidates, but also firms. So I just think they completely missed the mark.
Well, I'd like to bring up something, because I was at the meeting when this was initially brought into the NASBA.
Mhm.
And they said 30 hours of things to round out the accountant.
Mhm.
Because the teachers were saying, or the schools were saying they didn't have enough program to give them another 30 hours in accounting. So let's make the accountant a rounded person. If I were in shipbuilding, for example, maybe scuba diving would qualify for, well, it would qualify under the original ideas. Because apparently we're too narrow. We've spent our whole life trying to get to a CPA, and now we can't even play cards properly. So.
Yeah, sure. I want to call him. Logan's got his hand up for a while.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I agree with the sentiments. I think the best path forward is just deleting the education requirement. I kind of resent the idea of kind of having a substitute. I mean, they're just so different. This, like, the idea that you could replace higher education credits with on the job training kind of style work. I see them as really different. And it just seems a lot simpler. Just delete the 5th year, and replace it with regular experience. Yeah, so I don't like this proposal at all.
Thanks, Logan. I agree with you. Sherry?
I think I only weigh in because of the work session. So I've been around for a long time. I remember very clearly, the discussions when we moved to 150 plus one. And at that time, there was a lot of discussion about, adding depth to the candidate by way of problem solving, critical thinking, decision making, communications. And if the board goes back and looks at CPE requirements soon after that changeover, you'll see that those topics, became very obvious. They were called out in the technical aspects of Division 40. And there was a time after that at the executive director level and the state board CPE committee level, that those were taken back out, like removed, so they weren't obvious that they were technical. But those topics were part of that initial discussion when it was moving from, the 120 plus the 2 years of experience, including audit, to 150 plus 1. So that's a little of the background. And then also, a lot of discussion nationally about the 30. There was a lot of concern about to that point of what Stu mentioned too, was there enough curriculum available to fill those 30, and what would happen, especially in some states where there weren't as many universities to fulfill higher ed requirements. Would you then have a real issue with candidates even being able to pick that? At that point, didn't have online learning or, in the same way, correspondence courses, we'll talk about it that way a little bit more, or, dialing online, but it wasn't certainly Zoom and all of that to this point. So there were a lot of obstacles that were kind of in the way too. That's a little bit of how we found ourselves with the extra 30, kind of building maturity in some ways. I'm not advocating that that's right or wrong, I'm just more.
I want to make sure, since we're talking about the extra 30, the board had an opportunity to see the material I threw in there on the MIT study that came out, right?
Yep.
Because that's the first time that, we have data that kind of confirms, I don't think it's a huge surprise, but it confirms what a lot in the profession were thinking already, right? Is that in terms of the impact of moving from 120 to 150, right? There were 3 conclusions in the study. One is, based on that longitudinal study, there was absolutely no evidence that disciplinary rates, improved or worsened from one period to another. So no direct evidence that better CPAs came out of the 150 pathway. Second is that you had an overall drop in folks actually coming through the pathway after that. Now, I will admit big asterisk, and I know Logan is, probably by far the most tuned into this. I'm a little bit skeptical about hanging that all on the 150 thing, since we've also had a long period of time with overall declining enrollments across the board at universities. So there's probably more than one impact there. But the piece that really got my attention is that essentially the drop off was double the size for minority applicants, right? So we do have pretty direct evidence that whatever all the contributing factors and the direct factors are of moving to the 150 is that the pipeline became a lot less diverse after that. We know that now, right? And that's quite frankly what many of us thought would likely be the case, because that would be the populations that would be probably primarily struggling with the cost of an extra year of school, right? But now you have a data confirmation point, right? And that does change the picture a little bit. I did reach out to NASPA and ask them directly, and I said, look, without getting into any policy questions, does NASPA have a fundamental disagreement with either the data or the findings of what MIT has shown, right? I just wanted to see what if there's a reaction, right?
Mhm.
And basically what I got back from NASPA was they don't disagree with the findings. It's pretty much what they expected, and it kind of aligns with the data that they're seeing. So they don't quabble with the data. Okay. The issue is, the study came out, there hasn't been a task force meeting. Well, actually, now there has been, because I think there was one this week or last week, right? But at the point when I asked the question, the task force hadn't even yet had a chance to see the study, because it came out, I think, like in early February, right? So I don't know yet what the reactions are on the task force side, if that changes any minds, right? But I do know that NASPA is not going to quibble with the data itself.
Yeah, well, I would think maybe one of our comments is, please consider the data
Well, I think that.
in this program that you're trying to create. But to move the conversation forward, I think our kind of this 7A topic, we need to kind of agree upon some comments that we can send back on behalf of the board, right? And so I think, feel free to interrupt me. I just want to kind of summarize to move this forward. We can start out nice by saying we appreciate that you're finally taking this issue on, and you've open to alternative pathways. I think second, and this is me, you're not moving fast enough. This takes a long time to get through NASPA, through all the states. To actually have an impact, it's going to take years. So they need to move fast. 3, again, and correct me if you don't agree or we want to discuss, we don't like the new structure in place. It's an administrative burden that's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, I think it's, it feels like they're part of the way there, but are not fully embracing the, like, or showing that they're embracing an option to just move to an additional experience. Like, that's what structured professional program is, experience, but with a whole bunch of administrative barriers or guardrails that are seemingly unnecessary.
That's a more articulate way to say it. And I hate it.
Really don't like this.
Sign my name.
Fail. Love Joe.
So kind of.
And I don't know why they came up with 3 as opposed to 2. So they're kind of saying like it takes 2 more years to make up for, like to Logan's point, they're just totally different things.
Where do you see,
Yeah.
3 years?
Isn't that structured program?
It's a 3-year deal, and I do think, and Sherry may know this a little bit better probably than anybody else in the room, because you've been, you know, you have so much history in the profession, potentially Stu as well. My understanding is this, it's not about Oregon, I'm talking much more globally now for the CPA profession. I think that there were states out there, New York is one that comes to mind, right? There were plenty of states out there that didn't have a 120+2 model before they went to 150+1, but they had a 120+3 model before we went to 150+1. But Logan also has his hand up.
Yes.
I think we might have some relevant experience with our whole competency narrative that we required for a while and how much of a nightmare that was. This sounds like that on steroids, right? And so,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah,
supporting
good
that might
point.
be useful.
Let's get rid of something that was problematic and replace it with something worse. I mean, if they took away this structured pathway and just like went to, hey, I've got 3 years and I meet these competencies and I sign an affidavit and a supervisor signs an affidavit, I could be fine with that. But not this program.
That's actually what I was gonna ask explicitly.
Right, like I can give up go from 2 to 3
Yeah.
and what we've talked about.
Is the board open? Do you want to include in the comments that the board may be open to a 120+3 structure to get closer to substantial equivalency with what they're doing? You want me to include that as that the board is potentially open to that without committing us quite yet?
I'm for dropping those 30.
Yeah,
Like Logan said, just drop those. That means putting another year of experience. That's always better.
yeah, I mean, I find that, you know, in practice, when we, as good CPA, of course, I take the competencies seriously when we have licensees come to say, look, I met these competencies. And I go, did you? Because you've never done any of these types of projects. Like, I'm sorry, you've audited cash for a year. Like, we need to get you a better breadth of experience. It is hard in my firm, as a medium-sized firm, for people to meet the competencies within 1 year. And we push it and probably stretch it a little bit at times. But moving to 3 years, it's like, well, we know that there's sufficient time to get people the appropriate experience with 3 years. I would be comfortable with 2, but if 3 gets us out of a year of education requirements, then.
Right. And we have the same conversations in our firm,
Yeah.
another, medium-sized firm where it's like, well, you meet the time, but you haven't met the competencies. So let's, like, just
We gotta
we'll
kick
get
it.
you these experiences and then we'll sign,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Exactly.
so I'm fine. That's why I was totally fine with 2.
Yeah.
But if it gets us to a pathway where you eliminate reciprocity issues with other states, then I would do 3, but not with this program.
Right.
So I would I feel good if we strongly word that we don't like it.
Yeah.
All caps.
Words. I will say this, what I have picked up from the behind the scenes conversations and the comments from Dan Dustin in the executive director calls is that they are trying to bend over backwards to keep the states that are already, essentially have embarked on some pathway toward the legislature, in those cases driven by society. So we're talking specifically Minnesota, South Carolina, and I forget the other state. I think it's Georgia, but I'm not 100% sure. And essentially, they're already working with them to try to figure out like interim language that they could use, so that maybe they could put something in their legislation, but like not commit to a particular form that it creates. I don't know exactly what they're talking about, but I will reach out to them and figure out what that is, because they are, at this point, the tone that I'm hearing is desperately trying to keep everybody in the boat and trying to figure out a way how. I don't know yet how they're going to pull that off, because I see a huge distance between where the task force is at and where at least the original proposals in those states are at. But I think it's good for us to say, keep going, right? Because remember, the way the comment is phrased is, would you like the task force to keep going? And what I'm hearing indirectly here is, yes, keep going, but change your path.
Yeah.
Is kind of what I'm hearing here.
Yeah, and I think
Only but you're not there yet.
final comment is like, we're gonna continue to work on our, we're working on this now, so we can get this into the next the 2025 legislative session, and like, we can pivot a little bit on the language, right? But we need to keep moving on our end, so it's like, we're gonna keep moving, you know, you should do this. And I just think they need to have some pressure put on them. I don't wanna wait. So, yeah.
I think that we need to align directly with NASDAQ and everything. And I think this is one of those areas where we can deviate from the path and it's not gonna harm us, it's actually probably gonna benefit us. So whether they change paths or not. Unless they specifically say you can't have reciprocity.
Right, well, it's not.
Yeah.
They don't.
I just think this, I mean, keeping everybody in the boat is great, but I kind of look at it like, you know, what if another state did what we're talking about and said, oh yeah, we're 120 plus 2. And then it's our job to then say, well, are they substantially equivalent? And I'm like, I can't imagine us saying no. Right, and so I kind of have this in the back of my head, other states would have some common sense too, right? So that's why, like, I would say we need to keep moving, and hopefully they'll realize all these other states are.
I mean,
Hey, like,
if somebody said, Haley, what kind of program would you develop? I would say 120 plus 2 or 150 plus 1 if you have a master's, if that 30 credits is a master's. Done. That's what I would do. I think that provides a lot of value, and, you know, students that want to get a master's get credit for that. It's great experience and education for them. And so then they probably only need 1 year of experience to really, you know, get where they're going. But but I don't know how we bridge that. That's what I would want to do. That's what I do want to do.
I like that.
But how do we do that? And how do we comment that we want to do that, if that's what we want to do?
So, I mean, I think, Martin, do we have what you need to articulate those in a response?
I do. However, this is sensitive enough that what I'll do is I'll draft something up and give it to you. Make sure that you see it before.
You don't want me to wordsmith it? Like, no,
Of course you don't.
can't stand this. I don't like this. I think
It will be diplomatic. It will be diplomatic but clear.
perfect. Yes, I do. I would like, unless anyone disagrees, a clear message of keep going, but there's plenty not to like here.
I want to also mention, since this is part of the meeting where it makes more sense if I hear your comments, at the OSCPA Board of Directors meeting week before last, the board did determine that they would want to support the Oregon Board of Accountancy in these local and national conversations.
Perfect.
So,
I appreciate that. And I think that, yeah, more voices is going to be helpful, because that's what the profession's saying. They value the experience.
Well, that is actually huge, because I want to be clear about the board strategically about one thing, right? Regardless of where we end up landing in terms of the specific content, right? If we end up in a place that Jason indicated, right, just now, where we are not exactly on the page with the national folks with what we're going into the legislature with, the only way that I would recommend to the board that we do that and can do that successfully is if inside Oregon, we have everybody on the same page, that we're in lockstep with the societies, right? Because we're not going to win a battle in the legislature if it becomes a disagreement between OSCPA, OAIA, and the board. But if Oregon is unified, then I do think we can walk in, especially after engaging as much as we can in terms of trying to get to a substantial equivalent place with the national folks and not just, essentially playing the rebel card.
Just reminding Minnesota's legislation is in place for this year, which is 120 semester hours and 2 years of experience, or 120 semester hours, 1 year of experience, and 120 hours of continuing education. That's what's in their legislative proposal.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, the continuing education piece is hanging around this discussion like a millstone, because it's given NASBA an opening, a legitimate opening, to say it is unacceptable from a public protection and regulatory standpoint to equivocate continuing professional education with university level education, right? That is a huge red flag from a regulatory standpoint, right? And what that's given NASBA an opportunity to do in AICPA is pull everybody who wants an alternative to the 150+1 into that same boat of essentially accusing us of wanting to lower standards, right? And that's the part that actually for me is the hardest part of this discussion, because I cringe every time, and this has happened publicly, including from the prior NASBA chair, Rick Reisig, right? Who from the podium essentially deemed 120+2 a lowering of standards of the profession. And I was deeply offended by that, because there is no basis in fact for those kinds of statements.
Minnesota is also working on their legislative bill for next year. Excuse me, South Carolina, sorry.
What is South Carolina? Do we know what's the provisions in theirs?
They're working on several, I just haven't, our communication.
Yeah.
I wanted to say it was 120+2, but without seeing that in writing, I really hate to quote that. I like to look at it when I quote. So, but they're working on several other items as well.
Correct. Any other questions for people? I think that was a great discussion. Martin, you have, I think, what you need.
Yep.
Perfect. Just want to keep us moving here. So let's move to item 7B, board strategic planning implementation steps. So, discussion here and possibly some motions.
Yeah.
Martin,
So let's do this a little bit like what we just did here. Let's start first from what's the outcome point here, right? Inside your material, you have essentially a document that tries to take the next step from where we landed last meeting. Last meeting, we landed on, okay, we have a strategic plan outline that we're comfortable with, right? Now you have a document in there that gives a draft outline that's more specific on, okay, going in that direction could mean these things on a much more specific level, right? And so the issue is, this is essentially a way to start the discussion around, is the board solid? Do you have other ideas? What is this missing, right? Because we do need to now put a little bit more meat on the bone with respect to what the detailed implementation of this plan looks like, and in particular also impacts that we need to consider on the budgetary side, right? As you look at this document, one thing that I can tell you that is really helpful is that I have, as of today, I had to submit by January 22nd. So this was roughly a month after the last board meeting. Under the new budget process, under Governor Kotek, right? I had to submit in a draft outline of all the legislative concepts for this board for the 25 session, as well as a draft outline of potential budget asks that we would make in our agency request budget for the 25-27 biennium. There's one concrete development that's really positive that you can essentially overlay with this discussion here today, is that the governor's office has already green-lighted all of the legislative plans that I wrote into that document. That includes the discussion we just had around seeking an additional legislative concept for an additional pathway to licensure. And trust me when I say I value no baloney, full transparency when I talk with legislators in the governor's office, so they are fully aware that we are operating in an environment on that last legislative concept where there is no consensus yet at the national level as to where the profession wants to go. So they know that this is not an easy environment. I was not going to hide that from them. That's the worst thing you can do in these conversations. And they still greenlight it, right? There's a lot of good relationships and trust there in the governor's office, so feel really good about that. The part that's a little bit less helpful, and Jason, this may overlap a little bit with the discussion I had with you this morning. We actually were supposed to, but do not yet have feedback from the CFO portion, the Chief Financial Officer section of DAS, on the policy option packages that we proposed that I wrote in for the 25-27 session. That includes the deputy position that I wrote, in there as, hey, based on what the board did, this is something that could be coming in the agency request budget. So I don't have any official feedback yet from CFO. Does this mean that I'm panicked? No. Okay. But I do want to use this as an opportunity to connect some dots that are impossible for you to really take out of the packet, but are really, really important for strategy and pathway forward, right? So I need to take you through a couple of things that are first happening statewide and then why they impact us very specifically in this discussion, right? First starting point is the state as a whole is currently in a budget cycle that has seen historic cost of living adjustments, otherwise known as COLAs, basically pay increases for state employees, right? What does that mean? There's more than here than meets the eye, right? It isn't just that costs for us this biennium go up. It also means that the cost basis on which the regular cost increases, absent of any policy packages that will be used by the state, the cost basis jumps up a lot more than normal. And here's why. Because it won't just hit us on our personal services line items, right? A lot of the services that we pay for are assessments from other state agencies, and their costs will go up accordingly because there's personnel costs inside those pieces that will also drive up those assessments, right? So what does that mean broadly, right? What it means broadly is normally when you go into a state budget cycle and you say, okay, here's your 23-25 budget. What is the state technical language is current service level budget for 25-27, right? What that simply is, it's a technical term that's meant to describe if everything stays as is in your current budget, here's the higher cost that it will cost that for you to operate on for 25-27 without adding in any policy packages that you may propose, right? Normally, in a state budget cycle, you will see that line items will increase by like 3-4%, right? I think we can kiss that one goodbye for the 25-27 cycle. And state budgets as a whole, I'm still on the general picture here, but here's get in the moment to why this really hits us, right? The state as a whole appears to be heading toward a 25-27 budget cycle where there will be a significant increase in costs to operate for all state agencies, okay, set against a picture that currently, based on the best economic data that we have, will be set against a relatively flat revenue income picture. meaning the revenues that the states will expect to collect for 25, 27 will be highly unlikely in any way to keep pace with the level of cost increases that the state is expecting. What does that mean? Very likely, it will mean that the state will enter a budget cycle where in order to sustain services, positions will have to be cut, right? What does that mean? Historically, and this is where it gets on impacts for us and strategy for this piece here. The impact on us is state budgets politically and mechanically are driven by one size fits all and not treating agencies like us differently than other agencies that are funded by general tax dollars. In the context that I just described, what that means is that historically, and I do not see that state deviating from this, historically what it means is when the state says, whoops, we're in a place where we can't afford to keep doing what we're doing because we're not having enough revenue, right? The first thing they do is shut down any policy packages that ask for even more positions because they don't even have the money to fund what's there now. And they do not, I want to emphasize that loud and clear, they do not differentiate between other funds agencies that can afford it and general fund agencies that can't, right? What does that mean? It means that the only honest thing that I can say for the board, because that's one of the things that's on this plan, is that we're actually heading into a budget cycle where I can predict already that position asks by any state agency will face a steep climb. Now, here is the plan that I'm proposing to get us out from under this conundrum, right? Because there is a way for us to get there. And it's a little complicated, right? But here's kind of how I would like to connect the dots for the board, right? If you look at the overall strategic plan, right, there is more there than just the deputy position, right? What we also are very clear on, and it's also something I've talked with Sherry about and with my staff about many times, is that we have significant structural problems inside the agency around our disconnected IT systems, manual processes, and ability to deliver good services, right? Now, why in the world would I think that that's a solution to what I just talked about? So bear with me, right? We actually have a pathway based on a meeting that we had with DAS Procurement. And Andrew, please speak up if you, I know you're listening in, but please speak up and chime in here because I know you were in that meeting with DAS Procurement as well, okay? But in essence, DAS Procurement has given us a pathway, a little bit more complicated than I would like, but still a pathway for us to go through a procurement process under which we should be able to select a, quite frankly, potentially dramatically different IT package than what we have now that eliminates a lot of our disconnect manual functions needing to download stuff, right? Why is this relevant? IT solutions are currently on a subscription basis. So the old world, when you're looking at IT investments, right, that used to be about, oh, you're going to have to spend, blah, blah, X money, huge amount of money up front, and then there's this unknown of what comes after, has been replaced in the industry a lot, and you probably have seen some of this based on your practice, right, with what they call subscription models of pricing. Right? Subscription model means essentially the upfront costs go away, but you are essentially on the hook with the vendor on an ongoing basis on a per license cost, right? What that means is IT solutions require now a recurring funding for the subscription costs as opposed to the one-time approach, right? And that is a really critical piece for us to understand, because my idea right now, in terms of us getting there, is to do two things in our budget. And I walked Jason through the details in our in our kind of spreadsheet that lines up to our financial report, right? We have two recurring line items right now that together and in combination are enough for us to fund subscription funding and essentially some temps here, right? What we're proposing to do, and I think I started to talk about it at the last board meeting already, but I want to connect the dots very clearly for this board in terms of strategy here, is to say, okay, inside our existing budget, we have an IT professional services line item of slightly above $60,000 recurring per biennium, right? And we have so that's a recurring authorization, and we have an existing recurring authorization for our front office position. With the efficiencies gained under the IT package, right? Essentially, we can swap out those existing budget authorizations to fund the IT subscription as well as money for temps during renewals, right? The strategy here is, if we do this now and go into the 25-27 budget now, in combination of taking that IT approach, taking one position out of the equation and adding a deputy position, which I'm assuming the board still wants to do based on the last board meeting, that we could go into the legislative session not with an ask to increase us from 7.0 FTE to 8 FTE, but essentially with an overall budget that keeps us exactly where we're at 7.0 FTE. And the timing here is critical, right? If we do it together, it may well give us that pathway that we don't look like we're growing the agency, but that we're repurposing our 7 existing positions. And that might just make the difference for us getting what we need to get done in that overall political environment. And I'm sorry for the kind of the long explanation here, but that's a really, really critical piece for the board to know about and to understand behind the scenes. And it's quite frankly nothing that I would ever expect a board to pick up from reading a board packet. But that's essentially the connect here on the strategy. And I'll stop there because I do want to get some feedback there, because if you have concerns about that approach, I do need to hear it, because that's essentially what I would, in the absence of concerns, start moving forward with. But it's really, the board needs to be aware of how those dots really connect behind the scenes, because it's about a lot more than just costing a line item. It's all about the intersection between fiscal costs and strategy.
You just reminded me about 10 different times why I work in private industry. So it's like, hey, this makes sense. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
We do that with just a lot more words, Joe.
Yeah. Steps, people.
Yeah. But it all made sense. And anyone have any questions or concerns about moving forward with that approach? Okay. So Logan, you good?
Yep, that sounds great. And it sounds familiar being an OSU.
All right. Do we need any motions there?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just one part of this. There's still detail on here that we should discuss, but that's the biggest one that I felt like there's no way for you just reading the packets to see all those connections here on the strategy. But the rest of this hopefully is more obvious. And I don't know if you want to just go through the goals one by one and see if people have comments on any of the points.
Everyone's seen it, right?
Yes.
Does anyone want to talk about it? Does anyone have questions, concerns? I mean, I know I've looked at this many times and Martin and I have discussed it, but I want to make sure there's an opportunity to discuss. But if everyone's good, let's keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I think I'm good to push forward.
Yeah, I can read them all one by one if you want. All right, I think we're good there, Martin.
All right.
So we move to 7C now, the report from the January LRC meeting.
Yeah, And so this is one where, in all honesty, I feel a little bit, I don't want to say uncomfortable, a little bit more under pressure. And I want to explain that first why before I jump into the specifics here. The pressure that I feel is that we're in a very unique timing point in our laws and rules development, right? Because I would use the word heroic in his absence efforts of Ray Johnson to get us through a tremendous amount of lifts are now essentially have come to an end. You know, he's in Australia now. He's stepped out of his LRC duties. He's not going to return back to LRC.
He's not.
No, he's essentially, he has other things he now needs to take on. We have a wonderful person named Jason Orm, who's been, you know, one of the core members of the LRC, who's a tax partner over at TKW, and who I've known for a very long time and trust 100%, who's willing to step in. But we're in a transition phase. I won't be able to read, you know, Jason Orm not only is a tax partner, and right now I don't have to explain to CPAs that that's a busy time. He also happens to chair the, I believe, chair the tax section of OSCPA. What's the correct title for him?
The Strategic Taxation Committee.
The Strategic
So
Taxation
he's
Committee.
stepping down from that.
Right.
Transition down.
And I understand that committee gets especially busy during legislative session, right? So I cannot possibly approach the other Jason, so not this Jason, but Jason Orm. I cannot approach our LRC Jason for anything right now. I'm going to be able to read him into LRC stuff on the 26th of April. I have a work session with him for most of the day on April 26th, when he's survived the session, to kind of pick up all the pieces that we've done. Angie doesn't know this yet, and I love surprising her in board meetings. But I will have a quite extensive list of asks for Angie that will be fortunately not last minute, but it's like, hey, over the next 2 months, I would love to get this ready for that work session so that hopefully you can fit it in as you have time. So there's lots of pieces there we need to tackle, but for today, what it means is I don't have much brilliant assistance other than Angie across the way and Sherry's presence to kind of get us through the LRC piece. So that's a little bit unusual, right? So that's why I feel a little bit more pressure. The good news is there is less, and the even better news is that makes Angie feel slightly better about this. Instead of you looking at language that is unvetted and just coming out of my brain out of nowhere, that you're mostly looking at language that actually has been through LRC. We've had a conceptual discussion in December, and the language actually was primarily drafted by Angie herself, which strangely enough increases her comfort level with the language. So that's the overall context. So the specific items that I want to get through is, and I actually would love to do it together if you're open to it. The two core pieces that we really, that I need the board to take a look at are the issues that the LRC was grappling with around, number one, the statutory restriction that we have that says after 6 years, you can't be in of lapse status, you can't be lapse status, and your license expires, meaning you no longer have a license, right? The statute right now gives the board authority to bring somebody back from expired status, but the board has been hesitant in the past to do that because it doesn't seem to be a really clear pathway to do that. So the LRC essentially discussed and also looked at, because we are, looked at what we, what it is that we can do to kind of, that would make sense, right? The reason why I want you to actually look at this at the same time as we're looking at the other rules proposal, which has to do with the part where Oregon sticks out like a sore thumb, right? And we've had that discussion a little bit with this board before, right? That the fact that we have a rule that says you need to complete your your experience and exam requirements within 8 years of applying for initial licensure is unusual. There's very few states that have it. And right now, if you don't get through our initial licensure requirements within 8 years, you literally have to start completely over, including retaking the CPA exam, even if you've already passed it, right? So the LRC was trying to come up with what makes sense as an alternative, how do other states do it, right? Because most states don't have that approach. So we looked heavily toward Washington State in terms of their approach. And if you look at the items in here side by side, the reason I want to discuss them together is it is not a coincidence that the content, the substantive content in the approach to how do we bring people back from lapse status, from expired status, and the substantive approach to how do we bring somebody, keep somebody essentially in the initial licensure fold without making them retake the entire CPA exam. There are substantial similarities between the two, and those similarities are not coincidental. It's actually one of the things that the LRC embraced a great deal, right? But it's also the first time that I think you've seen really clear language in terms of what that could look like that would bring us, quite frankly, in closer alignment with other states, right? Those are the two main things. There are other side topics that I don't want to muddle the picture with right now, because they're a lot more minor and not really about new policy. But those two items are about definitely charting a new course, a different policy course than where we're at right now in our rules. And that's essentially where we're at right now in our rules. So I'll stop there and see what questions that I get on either, these are formally on your agenda as items 7C1 and 7C2, because those are really the two meaty ones in here. It's not a ton of text, but it's essentially the stab coming out of LRC and Angie in terms of us getting something on the books there, where if you like what you see, the ultimate ask a little bit later on the agenda is, would you authorize us to go into rulemaking around this stuff? So I'll stop there.
Questions, comments for anyone? Angie, do you see any problems?
No, I just want to check one thing because I was trying to find a problem with something that Martin wrote, but I couldn't.
I did do some very minor corrections to the language that you sent.
Okay.
Okay. But I can guarantee you that outside the education piece, which I haven't yet discussed, that you will like what I've done.
Okay.
This is going to impact many people.
You know,
Or help many people.
It will help. I don't think this is about the many. It's more about the principle of alignment. And for those people that it will impact, it makes a gargantuan difference.
Okay, and I do like alignment on things where there's no need to be different. So, I'll just.
Yeah, I have a question. Is there anywhere provisions, we say after 8 years?
Uh-huh.
How long after 8 years?
Right now, there isn't it's essentially if you
Without
do
having to
this
take the exam.
without having to take the exam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So technically, you're right. The way this is written is you could have, in theory, taken the CPA, passed the CPA exam 20 years ago. and this is your pathway back in.
And practice for 20 years, and then 8 years go by,
Yeah,
you say at 9, and you can go in here and do this,
Exactly.
right? So how long after that 8 years are we allowed, or is someone allowed to come back without taking the exam? Is that important? Or do people think that's important?
I don't know. It's a great question, right? I mean, the policy approach in the other states is that people don't have to resit for the CPA exam once they've passed it, and they don't put a timeline on it, right? But that doesn't mean that this board, this is about what's in the comfort zone for this board, right? So if the board comes back and says, you know what, we've been pretty strict around the 8-year window, let's become more lenient, right? But is not comfortable with an eternal deal, right? We have every policy right to not fully align. We can take a step toward alignment and say, draw an arbitrary line and saying, that's a pathway that we're good with for whatever, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but not beyond, X, Y, Z. And I don't know what would make sense there, that we didn't discuss that point, but I think the only fair answer to your question, Raul, is that we have every policy right to either not do this at all, or to say we want to put some further boundaries on this. That's within our purview.
To have to go on the assumption too that the required CPE and all this information here would probably catch somebody up.
Yes, and quite frankly, the discussion that we had at the LRC, and Sherry and Angie, jump in here if you feel like I'm overstating it, but I think there was a fair amount of excitement at the LRC about building in the supervised experience component. That really was an essential piece far beyond the CPE, where quite frankly, people can play games to a certain point with CPE, right? But it's very difficult to play games with supervised experience. And that was essentially a kind of a way of saying, okay, if you're really serious about getting back in, right? Getting into a public accounting firm, working there, getting that supervised experience essentially refreshed, or at that later point, means that you should be a lot more caught up in what's going on currently. Because that's essentially the recency of that requirement, that supervised experience can't be 8 or 10 or 12 years old, but has to be relatively recent. There is a reason for that. And I wish I could say that there were brilliant minds at the LRC that came up with it, but it's basically we're copying Washington's approach.
One thing I had said was that we should do it as a separate rule.
I think I did that. I did it on the one that you suggested, saying this would be a new rules. Oh, as a completely separate rule.
Yeah, you put it as 6. And the only reason why I think it is because it is sort of like a different licensing path a little bit.
Okay.
But I'm just trying to figure out if that makes a difference. And I can't remember why I said that, but I did say that it should be a separate.
Yeah, I tried to kind of separate it out and say notwithstanding the provisioning, blah, 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 so that it's clear in the one section that here's the 8-year rule, but we have this other thing over there if the board embraces it. But that to me is a more technical piece. What I'm looking for from the board is more are you good with the substantive requirement and the approach here? If you're basically saying, hey, we could take this language, but it needs to be a separate rule section, I don't think we need the board to bless that separately. That's a technical piece to me in terms of what the legal requirement is for us to set that forth correctly. But what I need from the board is figuring out, is the board, does the board want amendments to this? Is this in the comfort zone? Do you want to think about this more and say, what, this is too early, not enough of a folks, let's defer that later on down the road. There's nothing that forces us to do it now. It's just one more piece in the toolbox to kind of a little bit and make difference, not to a huge population, but for those folks that it makes a difference to, it's pretty big.
Questions, comments, concerns from anyone? Just to kind of move this forward, I'm good with moving forward into rulemaking in the spirit of alignment. I think that's been a big goal in this, complete kind of process that we've been working on. So we continue that. The impact might not be big on this one, but if it can help specific individuals get back, I think that's a good thing. So anyone else?
It's another step in opening our doors, allowing more people to be able to
Sorry.
keep people into the system, bring people into the system. Yeah, so I think it's a good, I would hate to align the other way.
Yeah.
Get more
Agreed.
No, I'm good with it. I
Yeah.
like the 1 year experience.
Yeah, that made a huge difference, I think, at the LRC level as well.
Yeah, Logan, you good with that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Sherry, any off the cuff reaction that?
Having sat through a few experiences of hearing where people have missed the 8 years and what it did to their career and thus impact on where they were hoping to work or continue to work. I think it's a step in the right direction because it's not lessening, it's, people have already passed the exam once. I mean, in my mind, working for, members and therefore licensees over all these years, the exam's the exam. And that's the starting point. So I applaud you for looking at this.
If it helps at all from a strict data standpoint, I have sent since the last board meetings 2 people directly to WASH. So when this happens and we have people come to us and we have no pathway for them, right? We don't just shut the door. We help them get to the door where they can walk through the door. So I work very closely with Washington State and the deputy director there. So when we have somebody come in where we know there's no way for you to get from point A to point Z under our current rules, but I know they can in Washington, then we very collaboratively work up with Washington so that they can still pursue, a pathway to CPA licensure. It's just a little painful that that's what I have to do right now, to work through another state, right? But it's the right thing to do rather than just say no. I've had 2 since the last board meeting, right? So it's not a phenomenal number, but it's not nothing either. It's not nothing either. And I have a 3rd one right now who is a little bit angry because we made an internal error by having this person apply and we try to catch them before they apply so that they don't pay a fee to us, right? And in this case, because they got bad information, we will actually refund what we normally don't refund, right? Because they got bad information from us about that they have a pathway here when they really don't. But it does happen.
And it just doesn't make sense to send somebody next door.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's just when it becomes ridiculous. Oh, but they can go next door, they're good, and then they can go get reciprocity, and you're like, let's the line, right? So I think we're all on the same page. That covers 7C 1 and 2, right?
Yep.
So we can move on.
Don't you need to vote?
I was
thought we could do it
thinking
all.
that 6 is what I.
That's fine.
Can we do it all at the end?
Yep.
So this one I need your help with, Angie, on 7th, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So you may recall that when Ray gave his report at the December board meeting, right? That he kind of admitted that we all had kind of a collective bloopster, I don't know, remember, but we basically missed something in our rule, right? So remember, OSCPA went to the 2023 legislature to pass the 120 to sit language, right? Which didn't change the licensing standard away from the 150 semester hours, but changed the semester standard at which point in time you can sit for the CPA exam. What we missed collectively in our rules is that while we wrote the 120 in to sit for the exam, the way we did it is that at least on the rules side of the equation, it no longer mentioned anywhere that you needed to still have 150. Now, did it create a crisis? No, because the statute always trumps the rule and the statute still requires 150. So please don't hit the panic button when you see the ratification lists later. There are no cases in here of people, flooding through with less than 150. That's not happening. The statutes still rule, right? But it was a little bit of an oversight. So what I tried to do, and I tried to do it efficiently inside the same Word document that changes the same section, and actually write in language that attempts to, essentially, it's not really a policy decision for this board. It's really just a technical alignment of our rules language with what the statute already clearly provides. And the statute is clear. You need 150 to license, it's 120 to sit, but we need to have our rules still fully catch up. So unlike the first two pieces that we had under 7C1 and 7C2, this is not a policy issue. This is just an issue of, hey, we gotta update our rules in a more clear fashion so that the folks that are reading our rules don't think that somehow the 150 went away, even though they should be reading technically our statutes and rules. Can I put you on the spot, Angie, and say, did you have time to look at the language and say either, yeah, this is okay, or we may have to offline tinker a little bit with how that's done?
No, I think it looks okay. You do have your lettering is off, but other than that.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Remember, I don't know if I disclosed earlier, but this will be this is my first board work session and strategic planning discussion that I'm doing essentially under the influence. But it's my joke was, and I guess I'll say it in a public meeting, right? So I'm on a significant cold medication, so it's not alcohol, okay? It's cold medication. But my inside joke was, this is where the first time in my life where strategy, DEI, and DUI meet. So anyway, just saying. So I wouldn't be surprised if I had something off in terms of my numbering. But if you're good with that, it means that what you're looking at in which document is it, Angie, since you have it up?
It's 7C1.
Okay, so 7C1 also has that language that I'm trying to get to in 7C3. I just didn't want to have you have more documents than necessary, but it has in the upper section here under yes. So under item 0100061C is essentially the amended language that writes the 150 in more specifically. And I just want to make sure that the board has at least seen it, even though it's not a policy decision, because hopefully you're okay with ultimately, and that's the ultimate ask that kind of gets into that. I've mentioned previously we've had some technical errors, right, in our prior rules. I don't need board approval to fix those because I already have board approval on those. So I didn't want to drag you through all of those again. But in essence, what I would love is to get a motion ultimately out of this board that says, please do the language for 7C1 to 7C3, plus the fixes to language that the board has already approved, and open rulemaking. And ideally, what I'd like to do to save everybody time, if it's okay with all of you, and do a rulemaking hearing at the beginning of the June 6th board meeting.
Someone say so moved.
So moved.
Second.
Does that work, Angie?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Hopefully next time when the board meets in June, you will have an LRC chair giving you a report, and you'll be less reliant on doing the transition. I do expect, just as a quick heads up for June, I suspect there will be a complete shift in terms of the types of topics that will come from the LRC to the board because I expect them that time to be focused a lot more on legislature and 2025 legislative pieces rather than rules pieces. I might be wrong, but that's because I haven't had my discussion yet with Jason, but I think that's probably what we need most urgently is to get language in front of the board that's a lot more specific around our potential ledge concepts. Angie, you are welcome to take that as a giant hint on what might come on your to-do list.
All right.
But I'm gonna write a lot of things up for you. I'm not just gonna say write it up. But that's part of what I'm talking about, and I want to give us time because I don't know what all you can draft and what we might need that tax council for on the scholarship side.
Perfect. Just want to check in with everyone. Is everyone okay? I was thinking, I think we have actually 7C4 to still cover. And if we can get through 8 and 9 quick, we could actually get all the way to executive session and take a quick break before we do that. If unless we want to do it now. If we're good, I think we can do 8 fast and 9's nothing. So
And thank you for reminding me that I
Yeah.
missed 7C4.
I'm usually the one that misses them. So
Okay, thank you so much. All right. You don't have any materials in your packets on 7C4, and I thought it was just easier if I just lay out what the issue here is and give you some context. And Andrew, if you're on and listening, please jump in with any data or numbers that may help us here. I believe, if I remember accurately, and Andrew, please correct me, what I essentially stumbled across is this comes a little bit out of an experience that we had in this last renewal cycle, where if you looked at inside the numbers and a bit more detail on, who actually ended up lapsing, right? One thing that really got on my radar is that we had a really high number of retired status licensees lapsing, really high. Andrew, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was somewhere around 200. Does that sound about right?
It sounds a little high, but it was a significant amount.
In any case, and there's 2 pieces that got on my radar. One is more of a process piece that I don't need the board's help to clear up, because essentially became really clear that for the retired population, us doing electronic renewals doesn't work very well. There's a lot of people who are very heavily paper-based, and I actually think, even though I'm not a super big fan of going back to paper, but I'm really concerned about the number of folks that simply are not connected electronically in the retired licensee population and are simply falling off the wagon because they don't know they're falling off the wagon. And if you now combine that with what the actual policy, so process-wise, what I intend to do is work with my team and say, what do we need to do differently around at least retired licensee renewals so that we can avoid that recurrence of that level of lapsing, right? Because that's not a good thing for anybody. What then got on my radar is we never really discussed or contemplated that occurring when we set our essentially reinstatement fees, because we have a one-size-fits-all reinstatement fee of, Andrew, correct me, I'm doing this off memory, $265 or $255, somewhere around that.
$255.
$255, okay. $255, right? And so you had folks that were not only upset, but you had folks that had to pay us because I have no discretion. The rule says it's $255 for you to come back. I have no discretion. I can't just make stuff up as I go along, right? So you have people that normally pay $50 for 2 years, and in order to reinstate for them, even though they don't have to give us CPE, it was a really hefty amount of money. I'll just be honest and say, for me at least, that didn't feel particularly good. Okay, it felt a little out of kilter, right? So I wanted to do two things. Number one, the board deserves to know, right? Because it's just one of those things that happens, right? Number two, I wanted to find out, does the board share my discomfort with that scenario? And if so, can we have a discussion on what a more reasonable approach to a reinstatement fee for a retired license would be for this? Because it feels just a little, and I'm sorry that I'm kind of revealing a policy bias here, but it bothered me a little, right? And so I wanted to bring this up and see what the board wanted to do in this concept. I stayed away from throwing out a specific number. If you want me to throw out a specific number, I can. But I thought it would be better on this one to actually just kind of take the temperature of, is this even a concern that the board shares? And if so, how would you want to approach kind of an alternative structure? Because if it's just changing a number, I can even throw it by means of another motion into the rulemaking that we can do so that we can get it in place and have a better fee structure in place for this next upcoming renewal cycle. Because I can make the next set of rules effective by July 1, since we have a June 6th board meeting.
Okay. Questions, comments? What's the
This
current
is
number?
255 is our current reinstatement fee, and the 2-year fee for a retired license is $50.
Mhm.
Right, so it makes a lot more sense when if you're an active CPA and you're paying, $255 for 2 years,
Mhm.
right? And your essentially reinstatement fee is, adds in $255 for each renewal cycle. But for retired, it just feels high.
You don't have to go through DAS.
No, I have to go through rulemaking.
Yeah, but you don't have to, when you're adding a fee.
I have to
sometimes you
report it out.
Okay.
I have to report out, so it triggers, if I make any changes in the board's fee structure, there are required reports out to DAS, legislature, that I then have to say, okay, we've changed our fees, right? But usually they're looking at fee increases. They don't get super nervous about increases.
Feels high to me. Anyone else?
I like $100.
Okay, what number were you thinking, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking that too. It's like
Okay.
$100, and in combination with us changing the process so we can
Yeah.
avoid people
Agreed.
falling off the wagon.
Okay, so to be clear, you would be looking for a motion to change the fee or reduce the fee to $100 and changing the process?
Yep. I don't need the motion to include the process change. I can just commit to the board that will
Okay.
happen.
Okay.
But I need the board's authority on any fee changes. And so if I can have a motion on that. to
correction.
include The rulemaking.
This is
Correct.
Andrew. The fee is $225.
Okay.
Yeah, same, thank you, Andrew. I think we're land at the same place though, still
Okay.
kind of,
Okay,
so,
so I move to adjust the reinstatement fee for retired licensees down to $100.
I'll second it.
okay, we have a second. Any discussion? I think, does that motion cover everything we
Yep.
need to do? Okay, perfect. Not seeing any other questions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes.
Awesome.
All
And
right,
I will take that as direction to include it in the rulemaking that the board just authorized.
perfect. I am going to,
Thanks for catching that. by the way.
yeah, I think we can just move quickly if everyone's still good. I want to get through items 8 and 9. So if we can, Martin, do you think we can get through these
Yeah.
quick?
There we
All
go.
right, so we'll go 8, new business. 8A is board appointments, status update.
I want to make sure that the board is aware that we now have an official application by Megan Hartley, who is a partner at Deloitte and a current member of the Laws and Rules Committee. She has put in an application for the position vacated by Nancy. So that's really great news. I also have confirmation that Raul and Jason, wait a minute. There were two folks here that had to reapply.
There were three, I thought.
Well, not well. Haley got out of the. Well,
Yes, I was one of those.
Yes.
you're one of those. Okay, so Jason and Raul have put in formal applications with the governor's office. And I have not gotten any pushback from the governor's office to let Haley continue on without reapplying so that we can have her for another year. So we can kind of stagger our replacements and keep some capacity on the attest side of the equation. So I will re-raise that with them. I'm pretty sure they will give us grace. I will re-raise it with them solely because they're so swamped and busy right now that I'm not 100% sure if they read literally every sentence that I wrote in there, because it's an extremely difficult environment right now, not because of the governor's office per se, but I will simply say that it's also impacted me a great deal this week. It's been a hugely challenging time to be a director of a small licensing board in this particular legislative session because of the unique dynamic that I started to talk about a little bit at the last board meeting. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead to the report here, so I won't say it later again. But just in that context, think about what's going on right now for small agencies in the governor's office and ultimately everybody else, but others have a little bit more resources to deal with it. You have a small session where normally you already have an enormous amount of pressure getting legislation through in a short session, right? This one's coming on the heels of a full session where because of the walkout in the Senate, a lot less legislation made it out the door than normal. And now we're seeing the consequences because the structure didn't change for the short session, including the limits on the amount of bills that can be introduced. What you now see is this huge upsurge in last minute full gut and stuff amendments, where each amendment not only replaces the entire text of the bill as introduced, but grabs 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 12, sometimes even 20 bills from the last session, stuffs it into a -2 or 3 amendment. And it's extremely difficult to just keep up with what's actually going on, what is impacting you, cost impact, policy-wise. It's enormously difficult. So I feel really bad for the governor's office right now because staying on top of that is exceptionally difficult. It's very difficult for my colleagues and I, because we barely are able to stay on top of what is normally our job to stay on top of because of the speed at which things are moving and the types of amendments that are coming in. So just saying that's part of the context here and why I'm gonna recircle back on the board appointments with the governor's office afterwards, because I can't have that conversation with them again before the session is out. They're just underwater.
Okay. And Haley, thanks for sticking with us for another year. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And taking on PROC.
Yes. Well, pleasure.
Pleasure is all yours, right? All right, 8B, attendance at NASBA Western Regional Conference. So that's June 23rd through the 25th.
All right, so
Yeah, I was gonna say Haley, I think volunteered to attend, bring back a formal report.
wow, you're just.
So where you meet?
Was that part of some kind of a deal you made with Haley?
No, I just wanted to get a reaction from her.
Oh, I see.
Busy. Very busy.
All right.
That day. When is it?
Just that day.
Logan, if I can put you on the spot for a second, I'm not expecting necessarily an answer today, but I know that last time there was a very unfortunate conflict that prevented you from going to the NASBA training. I don't know if you know this time around whether you can go to the new board member training for NASBA or not, but I want to just make sure that that's at least on your planning radar.
Thanks, Martin. Not sure yet, but yes, thank you.
Did you hear what he said?
He said not sure yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but then, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so Logan,
Awesome.
you'll get back to us on that, right?
Yes.
Mark? Okay.
Yep.
Are we looking for anyone that wishes to go or?
Yeah, I did raise it, and I have to do this very carefully, but I did already with NASBA and Megan say, if she ends up making it through the appointment process, I have already put the new board member training piece on her radar. She has not committed yet. But I know that there's no way that when you're a partner at Deloitte, that you're gonna go to a June board meeting and say, oh, 2 weeks later, I'm gonna be off for, 4 days being at a board member training. So I knew I had to have that discussion early in terms of her calendar. I don't know yet whether it will work for her, but I've done what I can both with NASBA and with Megan to try and get them to the board member training, which is the day before the conference, and hopefully it does that, but I don't know for sure that that's gonna work. But
Okay.
Where is it?
this is a great location. This is gonna be deep in Nebraska.
We're in Omaha. It's the only place it's in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Yes.
I forget the exact location. Oh, wow, okay.
That might be during the College World Series. I'm just saying.
Well, then why don't you throw your hat in and
Okay, well, I'm gonna Google during our next meeting. So.
College World Series?
June 23 to 25, that's what I know. I have no clue what you just talked about and what that.
College baseball, we're both Oregon State alums, and Oregon State's one of the best programs in the nation.
Oh,
And I'm
nice.
pretty sure
Should get
it'll be a
there.
good year, so.
Oh, and how does that tie into Nebraska?
It's in Omaha.
It's in Omaha every year.
Oh, it's in Omaha every year. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I have cultural gaps, so this
Yes.
is what now connects for me. Okay.
Yeah, if you hear Omaha, there's like several things that come to mind.
Steak.
Well, steak, yeah, College World Series, Peyton Manning calling an audible, Counting Crows song.
And then there's Warren Buffett, right?
Yes, and Warren Buffett. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
It does overlap.
Okay.
So anybody from here that is willing to go?
I could ponder it after Haley just looked up.
Because I do think we need to have some presence, especially with what we're doing legislatively. It would be good for us to have some presence there. I just want to be honest about that. It can't, I would love to go, right? But it's not the same for me to go as having a board presence at that meeting.
All right, everyone think about it. Stall in here.
Okay.
The potential lease amendment. So I know we've spoken about this, but
Yeah, and just a quick note on 8C. I'm assuming there's no questions on it, but I just have given you the regular updates from NASBA on the CPA exam outcomes. I'm not the right person to answer a lot of detailed questions, but it's really just an issue of keeping you in the loop on the data that we're getting out of NASBA on exam passage rates nationally, trends, Oregon, and so on. So that's in your packets as a routine thing. All right. Potential lease amendment. What I wanted to put on your radar here is there's no materials here for you to look at, but I wanted to bring something to your attention that's been developing for a couple of months now. One of them is at the state level as a whole, and then the other one is much more specific to us, right? So on the state level as a whole, you've already heard from me commentary that this particular administration under this governor is far more involved in making sure that government is run well, There's all kinds of, metrics and expectations out there. And one of them that relates to item 8D is that there is very significant concern in the current administration, and DAS is now getting very deeply involved in this, because the state is not exempt from what private industry experienced, right? Post-COVID, right? Lots of empty office buildings, and are people actually coming back to work, and how many are hybrid, and so on. So the level of underutilization of space is a struggle that isn't just there in private industry, it impacts state government and state operations as well. And this is now very much on the governor's office and by extension DAS's radar. The way that plays out is there's now very significant effort underway to try to consolidate agency operations into space and essentially get rid of unproductive leases and essentially money savings by utilizing the space that we have better and giving up space that we no longer need. That's the statewide picture. Inside all of this is a dynamic that's not entirely new. There is something, for those of you that are Salemite, that I know what I'm talking about. There is what we call the Capitol Mall, right? Which is essentially a series of state buildings close to the Capitol that are essentially DAS-owned and operated facilities. Those facilities also have a pretty significant vacancy rate, and that vacancy rate is slated to go back up once the renovations of the DAS West and some other stuff is going to be underway. So there's a lot of pressure right now to look at existing leases where state agencies are paying out money to the private sector and saying which ones should continue to go on, which ones should be bought out early, how can we bring people into that space, right? Now I'll be blunt. Inside boards and commissions that do work like ours, regulate professions, I will be perfectly honest that there's always been a significant degree of resistance of locating on the Capitol Mall, right? And that is not because there is a lack of appreciation for, the budgetary environment and the issues that government is trying to address. It is entirely for practical reasons, because you have, there's two layers here, right? One we don't like to talk about very much because there's impacts on employees, right? Because once you locate downtown, parking is no longer free, and it impacts employees' pay because they actually have to pay out for parking if they come.
And customers.
I'm sorry?
And customers.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you get to the customer piece, right? Now, if you're a state agency that is relatively self-contained and you don't have a lot of external meetings, that's one thing, right? For agencies like us, where we really need the ability to be accessible easily, have board meetings easily without having to figure out who can park where and who needs a parking pass and how do we do this, it is a hurdle, right? So I'll just be honest, for as long as I've been in state government, in positions like this, there's always been a resistance by small agencies like us for that reason to go specifically downtown, right? Because it has impacts on our business operations and they're not good. So what's come up now is I'm trying to take the temperature on, hey, there is a lot more pressure on us now, by us meaning everybody, including the Board of Accountancy, of saying, what is your contribution, essentially, to making sure that we do better as a state, right? And essentially one of the easier ways for us to handle this is to actually, since we have a bit of extra space in here and we have a sister agency that is actually doing fiscally better now, but used to be doing so badly it actually gave up its space entirely and is entirely virtual, right? And essentially, that's the state board of the Board of Tax Practitioners, right? And essentially, the Board of Tax Practitioners approached me about a month ago or so and basically said, hey, given this environment and given that we're doing a little bit better, right? So it's not about subsidizing that board and giving them space for free, right? Want to make that super loud and clear, right? But essentially normalizing their operations, but instead of them getting into their own space, that it would be a lot more, fiscally helpful to them to share space with us, right? That way we can send a signal to the state, hey, we're playing ball. We wouldn't have to move anywhere. We wouldn't have to move downtown. We make our contribution, right? And in essence, get us there. I know it's a little bit sensitive because there could be other discussions at some point down the road about potentially doing more than just co-locating these two agencies. But from a strict, let's be good partners perspective, save some money in the process, it's probably one of the easier things we can do. The current lease is I did not have any hand in this current lease, right? It's a little bit unusual in two ways. I have never seen DAS in my time approve a lease as long as this one. It's a 15-year lease, okay? That would also, quite frankly, raise a huge bar in terms of buying it out, and I don't want to buy it out, right? I would prefer for things to stay as simple and uncomplicated as possible, because whatever the upsides and downsides of this space are, those of you that have been around for a while know it's far better than what we had before. Far, far, far better, right? And I prefer to limit the upheaval. We have so much stuff going on, I would prefer to limit the upheaval, right? So I'd love to just work with my staff, have them get to know the two people that work for the Board of Tax Practitioners. I'm pretty sure that they will stay at least a good amount of hybrid as well, but it would give us some way of sharing our conveniences here. The way the lease is written is it does not require consent by the landlord if we acquire a subtenant that is also a state government agency. For any other type of subtenancy, consent by the landlord is required, right? At this point, I just want to take the temperature from this board. I haven't done anything yet. I haven't approached DAS leasing yet. I haven't done any of the substantive work, but I hate nothing more than going to, let's say, a June board meeting and shoving a fait accompli into the board's face saying, oh, by the way, here's a revised lease. Please vote on it. I don't like doing business that way. So I'd much rather, tell you, hey, here's what's going on. I haven't taken any steps yet, right? But here's what's on my radar and why. And I wanted to just at least kind of take temperature before I actually start going down the road of approaching DAS leasing, of having them figure out whatever the formulas are, that we would have to charge to the Board of Tax Practitioners to avoid any, issues of you're subsidizing them, because I don't want to get into that hot water, because that's not allowed under our statutes, is to subsidize another state agency. So it needs to be done by, I prefer an independent third party like DAS to figure out what these calculations need to be and how our lease would need to be amended to make that happen, right? Didn't want to really go down that road until I have a discussion here. So that's what 8D is all about.
Do you have space here to take on?
We have space. I don't have space for much more than two. It gets a little tight if everybody were here all at the same time, which happens very rarely. Right. So it gets a little tighter. But it's definitely doable because we have both their staff and some of our staff that are partially hybrid. So I think we're fine. Space-wise, we have, one office that's currently left, right? And if you connect it to the earlier discussion, that we're not aiming to increase the number of FTE in our agency, right? So connect that dot for a second, right? I would be a lot nervous about it if the board would have said, hey, we need to, we're going to work on increasing FTE in the agency, then I would be a lot more reluctant to take on 8D. So the sequence of this on the agenda was not entirely coincidental. So I needed to know first where the board would land on the other issues before, because that would have influenced a little bit on how I talk about 8D.
So wasn't there some talk of closing that down altogether?
Closing what down altogether?
The LTCs, the Board of Tax.
Yes. So I'm gonna say as much as I'm comfortable here in a public session, right? There was definitely concern for a while that the Board of Tax Practitioners was in a fiscal position where the very survival of that agency as a standalone agency was in question. There's two things that are going on right now, right? What I can say, what I feel comfortable saying factually on the record is I now work with, they have a new director there. I work with her regularly. Part of it is a mentoring thing because she's never been a director before. And she's not in an easy position because essentially taking on an agency as a new director where there is questions around how they can build their licensing base, how they can sustain themselves, don't have stakeholder agreement, or at least didn't used to. There's a pretty complicated picture for them in terms of their strategic environment, right? That's not an easy place. So part of what I'm doing there is simply helping her get through learning her job and navigating some of those pieces, right? The inside that, I can factually say to this board is I'm a lot less worried now than I used to be about a imminent ask, certainly not this biennium, and quite frankly, at this point, I also don't believe it will happen next biennium. That's my personal belief. Because if you look at their financials right now, essentially the equivalent of what you and I looked at this morning for this board, and if I look at the picture for the Board of Tax Practitioners, right, where their stuff isn't pretty, but for this biennium, they're projected to end with the same amount of ending balance that they started the biennium, which does not suggest to me an imminent path toward, that they have to be merged somewhere. Bluntly put, that decreases the chances that an ask would be made of this agency to take on the Board of Tax Practitioners formally as early as the 25 session already, right? It means they have time to figure out how they can survive, right? Can I absolutely guarantee this board that there won't be an attempt by whether it's the governor's office or others to possibly say, would it make sense to merge those two agencies together? I can't give you that guarantee because that's outside my control, right? What I will say is factually, based on just their fiscal position, the level of pressure on DAS in the governor's office is no longer at the red level of we have to find a solution for this agency, right? There is actually oxygen. My hope is that that oxygen can be used productively by, bluntly put, OAIA and some of the other stakeholders that we don't share that are unique to the Board of Tax Practitioners but are not our stakeholders, to kind of figure out a pathway forward, because my understanding is that they're dealing with very specific sets of proposals and struggling with consensus on how to build their licensee base back up and kind of get to a healthier place. but I can't speak for that agency. That's not my job. But I can say to you, Stu, that I feel a lot less worried now than I did 4 months ago about
Yeah,
us
years
being
ago.
asked to, take that agency on directly. At least not in the near term.
Because remember, there was discussion years ago about doing that and the.
Well, and it came back up again
Right.
because they got into so much,
Yeah.
they had a really tough biennium. But it looks to me like it's stabilizing a little bit.
So Martin, our confidentiality statute is a little different than theirs, and if that's something we probably want to look at, like if they're here and we have confidential things, they have confidential things,
I'm gonna write into the lease that they need to share everything with us.
they cannot do that.
I understand. I'm teasing.
But so just like from that standpoint of like what you guys would have to do to ensure that your confidential stuff isn't
Build a
necessarily
wall.
shared with them, and that kind of stuff is something to,
Build a wall like in Texas, okay?
yeah.
Oh, boy.
I'm sorry.
Well, we were doing great until that last point, but no, I'm just gonna, I think that covers 8D. That was informational, so no, any questions, comments on that? Not seeing any. So 9, old business, just confirming that there are none. So thank you everyone for hanging on. I think we're doing great time wise, and that was part of the goal here. So before we take a break, and we'll do a 10-minute break and then jump into executive session. Does any board member need to recuse from any cases being heard in executive session?
Actually, if I may, Mr. Chair, can I just ask, I know that we have, and I'm not gonna use any names, I'm just gonna talk conceptually. I know that we have an appearance in executive session scheduled for noon. Do we have enough materials inside executive session to go all the way from now until noon? Or should we, as an alternative, take the settlements maybe first before we go into executive session?
We could do that, or we could spend the time in exec to talk about the meat of the cases without hearing the appearances of the people.
I
Each
think we're gonna,
respondent is
I think if we went, sorry, Jeremiah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I believe we're gonna get through executive session within an hour.
Okay.
That's just my opinion.
Each respondent is scheduled to appear, and the first one's not until noon.
Right, so my point, like, if we need to take a break, yeah, we can go to settlements. I think we can cover basically everything in public session.
Yeah.
Outside of motions then.
Great.
And then I don't know what time lunches would be here, but
I'm sorry, I'm still on the info. So are you saying we should just keep going on public session?
let's take a 10-minute break. I know we haven't done that. But then we'll continue with executive session for pretty much everything outside of motions.
Continuing.
With public session.
Public session, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You make public session the Board of Accountancy, and it is.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Looks like we're recording. It is 11 a.m. and we're now resuming public session. We need to do roll call again real quick, or can we just, I think everyone's still present after the quick break. So we just finished 9 and we will skip number 11, come back to that after we do executive session. So we'll move on to item 12, which is the consideration of settlement proposals.
Hey, Jeremiah, before you get started, I just want to say on the record, I'm really, really proud of the compliance team and Jeremiah's work. They're getting that many settlements in front of you. So just want to say loud and clear, thank you. A lot of hard work there.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I mean, these are cases we just heard, and so to have them settlement agreements already is great.
Okay, no problem. The first one is for Francisco Pena. It was an issue of holding out. The agreement was 10,000 in civil penalties with 1,000 in costs, staying 5,000 of the penalties and 1,000 of costs for a net payable of $5,000. Do you mean to go through all of them and you'll vote as a block, or do you want to go and vote and go and vote?
I think, yeah, let's just go through all of them and vote as a block. I think there's only one that might have more discussion at the end.
This Pena was straight within the board's direction.
Yeah. Okay, and the second is investigation 23-004. There was an issue of professional misconduct, not disclosing legal proceedings, business transactions with clients. The agreement's 35,000 in civil penalties, 1,000 in costs, staying 34,000 in penalties, and the 1,000 in costs for a net payable of 1,000. And there was a practice restriction prohibiting him from performing professional services as a trustee.
This is the one where we wrote in language, kind of helping him transition out of some work that he was doing now, if I remember.
Yeah, he had one pending item
Yeah.
that was excluded from the
So
prohibition.
I appreciate you and Angie working together to kind of make sure that he could still finish that out and still be in compliance with the agreement.
The next one is a batch of cases 23-011, 012, 013, 014, and 020. It was due professional care, not responding to board communications, and not disclosing regulatory actions. The agreement was 5,000 in penalties, 1,000 in costs, stayed half at 2,500 and 1,000 in costs for a net payable of 2,500. The next one was a very similar circumstance for 23-015, 016, 017, 018, 019, and 029. Due professional care, not responding to board communications, and a plural firm name. 5,000 in penalties, 1,000 in costs, stay 2,500, and 1,000 in costs for a net payable of 2,500. The next one is 23-022, practicing while lapsed, not responding to board communications, and not notifying the board of a change of address. That came to 1,100 in civil penalties, 1,000 in costs, staying 500 in penalties, and 1,000 in costs for a net payable of $600. The next one, 23-023, not participating or enrolled in peer review. The terms call for proof of submission for enrollment within 21 days of the effective date, and 5,000 in civil penalties, 1,000 in costs, stay 1,000 in costs for a net payable of 5,000. The final one is 23-024, practicing while suspended. The agreed on terms were revocation with a prohibition from practice of public accountancy with a carve out to allow data entry and bookkeeping services. There's also a prohibition from employment at a public accounting firm and from holding out as a CPA. 10,000 in civil penalties and 1,000 in costs, all of it stayed for a period of 10 years, assuming there's no other violations.
Questions, concerns on any of those?
I know that was not an easy one to negotiate, so I appreciate you doing that.
Not hearing any, so would we have a motion to
Approve as stated.
approve as.
Make a motion to approve as stated.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Second, okay, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. Okay. Moving on to item 13, report of the chair. I don't have anything prepared. Kind of similar to what Martin was saying earlier. I've been copied on some emails between the last board meeting where, other CPAs, weren't happy with certain things. And I just appreciate the way Martin and the staff has responded to those with, professionalism, or in a case where the board has made a mistake, just taking ownership of that, Yeah, I just appreciate the professionalism and the way that we've been communicating with CPAs in that manner. So that is all I had. Item 14, Rolf, report of the vice chair.
I have nothing at this time.
Okay. Item 15, report of the treasurer, Jason.
Martin went over it extensively. We're in a good position to do a lot of the things we want to do in the future, so.
Perfect. I think you already went over most years, right, Martin? Item 16.
Yep. I did. I don't really have much to add, because there really isn't. The only thing that I want to say, because it just came up, is that, and I want to just, since you made those very kind remarks about the professionalism and the communications, right? I just want to acknowledge that there was a huge effort by the staff to get through these 2 months, right? If I have anything to report out, right? The risk of stating the obvious, the shortest distance between board meetings for us is always between December and February, right? So there's always that pressure there. This time around, it's significantly aggravated because was also firm renewal season, right? And I will simply say I'm really proud of my staff that on the compliance side, you saw a fantastic amount of activity really coming to a conclusion. That doesn't even tell you, and I think we actually still have to finish that work, but I think there's 2 notices we still have to get out on folks that weren't able to come to an agreement in settlement agreements. So I don't need additional votes from the board on that, but there's still more activity that is about to ensue and already drafted, right? And in addition to all of that, if you take the big picture view of what you're going to be asked to do in item 20 under ratification requests, right? You see a phenomenal amount of activity in terms of new licensees issued, in addition, in that short time period, in addition to all the firm renewal work that has been going on, where we actually have, we had a really rough renewal season, but for individual renewals, because we had all new staff last time, this is a renewal season where we got through it on time. And I'll let Andrew, talk a little bit more about some of our experiences in firm renewal season, but I just want to say a huge thank you to the staff, because there is a lot that's gotten done in the last 2 months. And that's with, quite frankly, us not being immune, literally, from the various, bugs and child challenges and illness challenges and all this other stuff. And it still got done. And I also couldn't have done it without Angie, because I know Angie is getting asked a lot to help us get through. And that's knowing that she has brand new clients assigned to her caseload that are very demanding. Obviously less important than us, but very demanding.
Not as firm.
So that's all I'm gonna say.
Meetings, all that.
I'll keep my report short.
Perfect. But and then did Andrew have anything to add
Andrew,
there?
what do you want to add on? Do you want to come in here?
I can come in or stay, your call.
That's okay. We just want to hear your report, because you have better data on firm renewals and other things and what's going on. So
The last 2 months has been heavily focused on firm renewals, as Martin was saying. We processed 797 firm renewals. In the mid-January, we realized we had not received as many as we were expecting, and we were able to identify which firms had not submitted anything. And so the licensing staff and Martin, we spent 3 days calling over 460 firms and notifying them that the renewal late period was ending January 31st. We got a lot of appreciative responses and a few not so appreciative responses. After the firm renewal season, we ended up with just a little over 80 that were terminated, which came from downsizing of firms and they didn't need to be registered per our OARs, or firms were emerging and being terminated that way. We have 5 pending reinstatements and 13 new firm that are still pending. And then I was going to bring up the licensing database, but Martin brought that up earlier. That is it for what I have. It's just been heavily firm focused the last 2 months.
The only thing I would add to that, so thank you, that's a much better picture, much more detailed picture, Andrew. The only thing I would want to add to that picture that I think is really important for the board to know in terms of approach within the numbers that we just heard is that in essence, because we had that late reach out to the firms, right? And we fortunately came across, the buckets of, oh yeah, well, sorry, we forgot, we're going to get it in right now. But then of course, there was this sub bucket of solo practitioners, where one of the things that really kind of got on our radar is, right? Number one, for solo practitioner firm, doing a late renewal is expensive, right? It's not a small cost because you're paying double the renewal fee during the late renewal season, right? And one of the things that we discovered as we were getting in touch with the solo practitioners is that it appeared from the data that we could see that there were quite a few where essentially in the past we've taken kind of a, if I would say, hands-off approach, right? Where essentially if the firm was renewing, we didn't look behind the curtain and let the firm renew, right? Good for us, we get in the money, right? But then as we were reaching out and we were dealing with these scenarios, right? It actually gave us an opportunity to talk with a lot of these solo practitioners about whether they still needed to be registered as a firm, because there was a significant subset that where we could tell that they had stopped doing stuff that required peer review, right? That all they were doing was tax, that they truly were solo, right? So the conversation was, do you actually need to renew your firm with us? Because there is a way for you, quite frankly, if you don't need a firm, all you have to do is tell us that you don't intend to renew. There's no fee at all for that. Not only is there no late fee, there's no fee at all for that. You just need to tell us, right? And so it actually gave us an opportunity to, quite frankly, be a little bit more proactive than maybe we've been in the past, to look at firms and say, are you over compliant by actually registering your firm? By registering as a firm when you're a solo practitioner, right? And that's one of the reasons why we ended up also with quite a few. We had 2 buckets. Those that intentionally didn't renew, right? They knew their firm renewal was coming up and they said, I don't need it anymore, right? But then there was a pretty significant subset of the solo practitioners that we reached out to that we haven't heard from, where in essence, it became an opportunity for us to kind of weed out the ones that actually didn't need a firm. And it became a much easier and a much more positive resolution in that respect. And so what that also means going forward as a learning moment for us is that I think we're going to pay a lot more proactive attention to, does a firm actually need to be registered with us before we just focus on processing renewals or even getting into late fee scenarios, and having those conversations, quite frankly, much more on a partnership basis than just well, if you want to renew, it's a late fee now and leave it at that. Because quite frankly, I think it's the right thing for us to do is to just be honest and say, we don't see any evidence that you have to be registered. Tell us what you're doing. Let's have this conversation. Because if that turns out to be true, it gives you more than another way to comply, not just paying us a late fee.
Absolutely agree. All right, thank you, Andrew. We will keep moving. So item 17, the complaints committee meeting on January 4th. I don't think Tanya was able to join us. Raul, any?
I wasn't able to be at that meeting.
Okay.
Sure.
Martin, any comments from the meeting?
No, I think it was a relatively, this one was a relatively low-key
Yeah.
BOAC, not a lot of activity. Nothing that I think I would want to bring up in public session. Anything that you can think of from a public session standpoint that we should bring up here? Nope. Okay,
How long was the meeting out of curiosity?
short. About 2 hours.
It's refreshing to hear that.
12
Compared
hours.
to what, for those that used to be on BOAC, on what some of those meetings used to look like. So we've come a long way. What else?
Only Stu remembers what it was like when we had no BOAC at all and 2 and 3 day long board meetings.
Because everything just came.
All the cases ourselves.
I shot up the whole weekend. So.
We like the BOA.
We've come a long way.
Yeah, all right. Item 18, pipeline committee report. So Logan, do you mind give us an update on that? I think there was a 18A, we had a January 12th and a February 9th meeting.
Yeah, a lot of work on the criteria for giving out scholarships to students. And the challenge with the whole process is trying to find the students that need help. All the students that need help, maybe they're part-time, maybe they're not even yet enrolled in a major, maybe they're just doing a certificate. But then also ensuring that the funds are actually going to increase the pipeline, not just some student who's just taking one class and doesn't actually truly, have the likelihood of becoming an accountant. So we're trying to kind of strike the right balance there and in terms of eligibility for the scholarship. And the other kind of hard question is how much to give these students in terms of the scholarship money. How does that vary across students, and what if a student is taking just one class and then suddenly they're getting a $3,000 scholarship that exceeds their cost of tuition, and how do we feel about that? So those are the big questions we're working on and making some progress. I think there's some consensus forming on how to approach things to meet those trade-offs well.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about the outcomes of this committee and moving that forward.
Likewise, yes. Any questions about the process there?
Any questions, anyone?
No, just for the record, in 18B, you have the goals document in your packet that Logan was just referring to, just for context. And there's a lot of work that Logan just described that went into that by that committee.
All right. Yeah, thanks again, Logan. Moving item 19, PROC. So another January 12th meeting. So Haley, any comments?
January 23rd meeting during ICE-mageddon. It was, it was a great meeting. It's a very engaged group of people, which is awesome. You have the annual report in the materials. You may notice that there are a lot of members who are expiring, their terms are expiring or their terms are up, but they're working through a process to make sure that we are maintaining the integrity of the committee by keeping the right people on who want to continue on, which is great. The main thing to report on, though, is the dissolution of the Oregon program that was effective on February 1st. So the firms have been contacted to let them know that they're being transitioned to the AICPA program. And we are now under that. The Oregon program is non-operational as of February 1st. Do you have additional comments on that, Martin?
No, not really. I think you're absolutely right on the money to call out it's an amazing committee.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention to you, Joe, that everybody on that committee, with one member's exception, who has very difficult personal circumstances, wants to renew. So you and I have to have a separate conversation just around authorizing their renewals, and they are on fire, and it's just really fun to work with that group. Fantastic chair. And I want to point out something that may not have been obvious to you historically, right? But I appreciate you bringing up that we have a calendar year 23 proc report. I missed exactly what happened with the board between 2017 and 2022. And I haven't looked, but I think it's been a really long time since this board has gotten a formal report out of the peer review oversight committee on its activities and accomplishments, right? It actually looked to, quite frankly, really scary and highly voluminous, it's like 200+ page peer review oversight committee report that was done in the state of California by their peer review oversight committee. That was hugely intimidating, but it gave us a bit of an idea of, hey, an engaged proc should be able to have some kind of a formal report back to the board, right? And so there were some ideas taken. Good for you. It's not 256 pages long. If you haven't noticed, it's not in your board packet. But I do want to just call out, not only am I super proud of that group, the way Haley described, but I feel really good about the fact that they actually tried to come up with at least kind of a solid report back out on their activities and accomplishments. That's a big, healthy step forward that we haven't had at the board level for quite some time.
Thank you. I think I saw lunch being wheeled in, so we still got ratification requests, but maybe we could do kind of a working before we get to noon so we can eat and discuss beforehand, just to keep making progress.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll keep moving after that. Item 20, ratification request. So recall 20B, this has been removed. So we have 20A, the CPA certificates and permits, and 20C, the muni roster. So we would just be looking for a motion to approve those as presented.
I make a motion to approve CPA certificates and permits and municipal roster as presented.
I'll second it.
Great, do I have a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? Hearing none, abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now, because we've covered everything we can, we'll take another quick break, assuming lunch, we can grab lunch. And then we'll kind of move into kind of a working executive session if that works for everybody. We don't need to start right away, but before we pause public session and head into executive, does any board member need to recuse themselves of any cases? Okay, hearing none. So I'm now recessing public session, and when we come back from break, we will be entering executive session under authority of ORS 192-660 sub 8. The time is now 11:25.
Thank you, Joe.
And,